Okay. Hi, what was that? Anyway, I wanted to talk about books that I think will become classics in like 50 years, 100 years. That people are gonna say, like, oh, this is a classic. This shaped our culture, or like the culture right now. Or like this had so much influence on literature, stuff like that. Like think books that came out recently, this decade at least, that I'm sure will stand time, that within 50, within 100 years we will still be talking about these books because they're just that good or so influential or so important. And I'm just gonna talk about books that I read, that I think would become classics in the future, or should be classics, considered classics in the future. I'm sure there are so many more books out there that could be considered classics. I actually have one that comes to mind right now that I don't have in here yet. I don't know why I left it. I don't even know if I have it here at my house or if it's at my parents' house. I'm not sure. But I'll talk about it anyway. So all of these books are recent books, like this decade, within the 2000s. I think all of them. Yeah, all of them are published within the 2000s. Some are a little bit older. I think it goes back to 2005. It's like 19 years ago. But for me, these stories stuck with me, and I took great lessons out of them. I learned a lot from these books. Sometimes I also just gonna talk about writers, because I think that not necessarily the book I'm gonna show you, but like the writer itself should be a classic novel writer in the future, like Jane Austen is. We talk about all of her books, and there's not one book of Jane Austen that's like, oh, but this is the classic. No, all of them are classic, considered classics, and like great novels for a woman from her time period. And that is what was so important with Jane Austen, the fact that she was a woman in the period that she lived in, and she was a writer. And most likely she wasn't able to just write like men did, like have a separate room and sit in that room and write their little novel or their poetry undisturbed. No, woman had to sit in a common room. I don't know what the exact name is. There's a name. No, it's not a parlor. I don't know the exact name anymore for it, but everybody gathered there and sat there, and like when there was the visitors would also sit in that room, and then everybody was in that room and they were talking. And Jane Austen likely didn't have more than half an hour at the time for herself to be alone and write her novels, and to write anything in such a short time period and like make it cohesive. Because when you're reading Jane Austen, you don't notice that it was written in like short pieces every time. So every time she had to pick up her story again from where she left it when visitation came in, and she had to hide her manuscript because she as a woman being a writer in that time period was looked down upon. That was not normal. Women didn't do that. Women weren't meant to write. That was strange. So she would have had to hide every time someone came into the, I'm gonna call it parlor right now. I know it's not a parlor. It's the wrong name for it. I need to look it up. But every time they came into the room, she had to hide her manuscript behind underneath other things, and then continue again, like pick it back up when they left. It's crazy, and that is a reason why Jane Austen is a classic, considered a classic novelist. But partially because of that, also because of the stories itself, portray a perfect image of what the life of a woman looked like back in that time period. Her writing is exquisite, just they're beautiful. If you're into that kind of stuff, which I understand not everybody is, so hold on, hold your horses before I get like some haters on me. Jane Austen is just a an example here of a writer. There's so many more. I'm thinking about how did I forget his name? The writer of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Wait, it's here. Where are you? Oh no, I don't see it. Oh no, where is he? I know my book is there. Huh? I lost my copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray. How did I do that? Wilde! Oscar Wilde. Wow, my brain today. Oscar Wilde was also considered a great novelist. Now, this is a man, but the reason, first of all, the story, I mean, for example, The Picture of Dorian Gray is an amazing story. It was one of a kind back in his days. Greatly written, elaborate language, so beautiful, descripted. I love it. But next to that, it's again the writer himself that makes the classic even better, because he was gay, and he was as much openly gay as he could be back in the century he lived in. And again, that, like, these writers, these classic novelists, when you look at their books and you would put them next to each other, like you go from Shakespeare to Oscar Wilde to Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, and so on. These writers, like Virginia Woolf, these writers have nothing in common. Like, their novels, they're not really the same genre, because classic literature is not a genre. It's a sale technique. It's the Penguin classics. Everybody knows these, but when you look at the classics itself, you can't really compare Moby Dick with Jane Eyre. You can't consider these two books, like, you can't put them next to each other and analyze them, like, because there's no reason to do that. Why would you ever take Wuthering Heights or anything by any Bronte sister and, like, compare it to A Christmas Carol or something? Like, that doesn't make sense. Nobody would do. I hope nobody would do that. I don't know why one would do that, but they're all classics. And what these the writers have in common is that they have a unique life story, like all of us have. But it's most of the time, for me, the writer who makes it more interesting. And I love to read the classic literature next to a autobiography or a biography about the author, because the author's life I find most of the time more interesting than the classic novel itself. Even though I truly enjoy classic literature and I appreciate classic literature, I think the person himself, herself, themselves is so important to look at. And I think in my pile, I do have a couple of writers in here, who deserve more light or already have a lot of spotlight on them and are doing great. And I actually want to start with Kaveh Akbar. This is a book that came out this year. Martyr? How do you pronounce that, actually? Because that's a word that I don't see often or use often. But this book blew me away. This was a 5-star read for me. But I see how this could be a classic in the future. How people are still talking about this book in 100 years. Because it starts with a very reliable, depressed, alcoholic 20-year whose life is shit. And I think, not that most of us are alcoholic, depressed 20-years, but most of us do feel in our 20s like we have to do great things and we are not able to do great things. Like, he wants to be a poet, but at the same time, he always talks, when he talks about his poetry, he talks so badly of himself. He talks himself down so much, and it's so sad. But I think that is what a lot of us are doing, actually. We say we want to be something, but then at the same time, we're comparing ourselves with others and just constantly critiquing ourselves. Like, it's not even other people who are critiquing our work, because our work is not even out there to be critiqued, because we're already critiquing ourselves so much. So we never publish it anyway. And that's sad. And this is how the book starts. And then it kind of, it shows like parts of this boy's life, like the past and everything. And also it tells the story, like it goes from his like now time to like the past, and they tell like the story of his mother, story of the brother of his mother, and all of those things. And it turns halfway the book, the perspective is more on the mother and her life, and you can compare them because she's also an artist, and it's also a queer story, so they're both gay, mother and son are gay, and you see so many parallels between the story of the mother and the brother and the son, the mother and the son, and it's so interesting to look at it, how similar they are. And I don't want to spoil too much. It's really hard to talk about this book without spoiling it. But I think there are super important lessons in this book, super important things to look at in this book. And this could definitely be a classic, showing the life, like two separate lives of an Iranian American in a different light. Like, not necessarily the immigration, because there is a part about immigration, but also just but I've been here since I was a baby, and like life is still tough for me, Iranian American. Like, I feel more American than Iranian, but then there's also like the typical Iranian stereotypes and stuff like that. It's such an interesting book. It gives so many interesting perspectives, and it could be it's already, for me, a great classic. Next up, I have a couple of Asian, like this was an Iranian writer. I have quite some Asian writers in here too, because when we talk about classics, a lot of time it's like English classics, American classics, Russian classics. There's a couple of very good French classics, but those are the big four. I named four, right? I think I named four. Those are the big four. But I feel like when it comes to Asian literature, we only recently started translating Asian writers' books into more languages, and I'm very happy that we're doing that, but we should have been doing that way earlier, because there are so many amazing stories and writers coming from Asia, and I want to appreciate that more. I read so many Asian writers recently that I just absolutely fell in love with, because their literature is different from Western literature. It's not the same. The writing style is not the same. The flow of the book is not the same. The concepts they're focusing on is not the same. Even if it's a slice of life story, it's not the same, because there's a different culture. There's different expectations from that culture towards people, and it gives a completely different story and image, and I like that. It's refreshing. It's something else. Like, I love my Russian classics, I truly do, but once you kind of have that grasp of like what the Russian aristocratic life looked like back in the 1800s, at one point you start to get sick of it. Weirdly enough, you do, and you want something else, and it's refreshing to then read an Asian writer, because it's so different. It puts a spotlight on different parts of life that we sometimes don't consider too much or like think about too much, and that is interesting. And the first one I want to talk about is Min Yin Lee's Pachinko. Pachinko is a story about multiple generations of a family, and it starts in South Korea, in a very poor village, a fisher's village, I believe, and it's the war with Japan, and these you see how this family moves to Japan, and they become Korean Japanese. Well, they stay Korean because the Japanese don't really allow Koreans to integrate very well. And it's just all these layers, and I love that it is multi-generational, and that you see how much in generations, in like decennia, things changed for this family. And I love this book so much. I read this book while simultaneously watching the Apple TV series that is made of this. It was so good. It's so emotional, and I was so invested in these characters. Min Ying Lee's writing style also is so good. I read it in Dutch, which I usually don't like. But I could feel her flow of words in this, and I didn't mind that much. Maybe I get another translation, an English one, see how that is different, because translations sometimes they not all translators do a good job at translating the writer's feelings, but in Dutch it was okay, I think. What else can I say about it? Why is it a classic? It's a classic because it talks about how war, how immigration again is visible in generations later. We're talking about 3 or 4 generations later, after like the first person that moved to Japan, the very first person this book starts with, after she died, we still see her grandchildren, that generation, struggling with the fact that their grandmother was an immigrant. And that is so important to know about. That is such an important story to tell. And I think everybody should read this for that reason, to have that insight on that. And also on just the culture of being Korean Japanese, what that means. I think is also so important to know. And this writer wrote it so beautifully, and I think it's a chunker of a book. It's a tome. It is how many pages? It's like 600 pages. It's an absolute tome, but it read so fast. This should still be relevant within 100 years. It should be. We should really look more into that. The next writer, I have another Korean one. Let's stay in the Korean first, and then we're going to go to the Japanese writers. The next one is Han Kang, the vegetarian. Also, her other book, Greek Lessons. Han Kang's writing is so unique. I've never ever read anything like that. Definitely in Greek Lessons. Greek Lessons, the writing style was so new to me. I devoured that book because it was so refreshing to read something creative like that. She's so creative in her writing. And in The Vegetarian, I already loved The Vegetarian when I read it when it came out a couple of years ago. It's out for quite a long time. It's more than 10 years, I think. When was this? 2015. Yeah, 2015. Yeah, it's more than 10 years. No, not yet. It's 9 years. I'm bad at math. But this story, it was completely different than what I expected it would be when you read like, oh, The Vegetarian, okay, woman is disgusted by meat, okay. But there was so much more underlying there. There was so much underlying problematics of the culture in South Korea in this book. And it gave a very good insight on that culture. And it was so much more than just about, oh, meat is disgusting, we need to save animals, let me become a vegetarian. It was so much more than that. Also, she didn't become vegetarian, she became vegan. That's also interesting how the title is not the same as, like, because she threw away leather shoes and everything like that, so that's vegan. But yeah, it also says that, to me, it also says like the character in the book, she is just doing what she feels is right, and her family gives the title vegetarian, but they don't understand her. That's what it tells me. They're telling, oh yeah, she turned vegetarian, but she actually turned vegan because she also is throwing away any animal product, and the family is just not understanding her correctly. That part of the book, like the family just not wanting or trying to understand her. There was so much Korean culture in that. It made me angry. It made me sad. It made me furious. I felt so many emotions about this book, about family dynamic. Absolute classic. Absolute classic. Korean classics should be a thing. Korean classics. Let's start that. Let's make that famous. Let's hype it up. Korean classics. Okay, let's hype another one up. Japanese classics. Let's hype up Japanese classics. I want to start with Breasts and Eggs by Breasts and Eggs by Miko Kawakami. Why should this be a classic literature? This should be a classic because it's a story about woman, about a girl, about everything about womanhood. And I needed this book when I was little. I read this book last year, which is too late. I read this when I was 26. I needed this book when I was 20, when I was 18. That's when I needed this book. That's when I really needed it. Because it talks about, first of all, there's the perspective of the daughter of, like, yeah, it's like two sisters and one of them has a daughter. The daughter's perspective to me was so important because in her little diary entries, that's all we get from her in this book are her diary entries. We see, I saw myself in it. I recognized myself because she was talking about like first periods and like how her classmates are having their first periods and stuff like that, and how scary it is and how nobody's talking about it. And I was like, yeah, exactly. About how painful it is when your boobs start growing and how you're laying in your bed in the middle of the night thinking, oh my God, do I have cancer? Am I dying? Why am I in so much pain? Like that feeling. Yes, I was there too. I've been there. Oh my God. As like a 12-year-old thinking like, what the hell is happening? Is this normal? Yes, it is normal, but nobody told me it was normal until years later. And then this book, it's there. It's that. It's the sister, like the mother of the daughter. It's how she's looking at her own body, specifically her breasts. But like, it's just the image of looking at your own body as a woman and thinking, why do I have such small boobs? Couldn't I have bigger boobs? It's that. It's society. It's the voice of society coming in your ears when you're young. Like as a teenager, I had this a lot of times. I was always super conscious about my boobs. First of all, the fact that they were growing. So like, oh my God, no thank you. What the fuck? But then a couple years later, it's like, oh my God, my friends have bigger boobs. What the fuck? Why are mine so small? And then it's like learning about like porn and things that boys like, and you figure out, oh, they like big boobs. Big boobs is what we want. Oh no, I don't have that. And then wanting bigger boobs and then focusing so much on that and just comparing what you have with what others have, and just feeling so bad about that. And this book too, like you see the sister, they go to like an onsen, and in an onsen it's like all women and they're all naked in a bath, and she's looking straight up to other women's boobs and describing them and talking about them and comparing them with her boobs, and then looking in the mirror at her boobs and describing them, being like, why are mine not like hers, like in the onsen? Why can't I have her boobs? Her boobs were perfect. And it's also like, but what are perfect boobs? Does perfect boobs exist? Why is that a thing? Does it have to be a thing? Like, that entire conversation is in here. And then the third part of the book, the big part, is the main character itself, how she wants to have a child, how she wants to become pregnant and have a baby, but she doesn't want, or she doesn't have a relationship at that moment. She doesn't have a husband. She's also not actively looking for one. She doesn't really need a relationship. She's an independent woman and she's happy the way she's living, but she just feels that yearning, that deep-centered nature within us, like, I need a child, I need to become pregnant. Like, I had that feeling too a couple of times in my life, where I'm like, I need a baby so desperately right now. Like, I really want to have a child. And the feeling that it gave to me, that yearning for a baby of your own, it's so deep rooted. It makes you almost feel like you're a failure as a woman. You're not doing what you're made for, what nature made you for. And it's a very primal feeling, and that was in here too. And that is why I think this should be a classic. It talks so much about things that women go through that you don't hear often enough. Nobody talks about these topics. Such simple topics that all of us go through, that all of us feel at one point in our life, and we just don't talk about it. And that is why this should be a classic. That is why we should be talking about this. So important. Then another one, Banana Yoshimoto. I took Kitchen, but anything by Banana Yoshimoto is amazing. Amazing. The woman herself, her life story, also amazing. I highlighted the hell out of this book. I wrote a lot in this book because this was a roller coaster for me. I even wrote down like my favorite quotes in this book. A quote that hit me so hard was, "If you're not in love with him, you can understand him." That sentence alone. I love that. It's so good. Life is hard, yes, but if a person hasn't ever experienced true despair, she grows old never knowing how to evaluate where she is in life, never understanding what joy really is. Yes, there is no light without darkness, yes, but then said in a way more beautiful way. I also just wrote Eriko's will, page 51 to 53. I couldn't quote it here. It's too long. It's 3 pages. But yes, that. Truly great people emit a light that warms the hearts of others around them. When that light has been put out, a heavy shadow of despair descends. The writing is so, so beautiful. The world does not exist for my benefit. Yes. To say it would mean to suffer from it. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. By the way, this one is 2 books. It's Kitchen and it's also Moonlight Shadow. It's 2 in 1, this one. But Banana Yoshimoto, Japanese classics. Yes. Put her on the list, read it, be emotionally destructed. That's all I'm saying. Then I have a special one. I'm not sure if this would become a classic, but for me, it's definitely a Japanese classic again. If I had to make a Japanese classic list for the future, I would put this one on. And it's Emi Yagi's Diary of a Void. And it's about this office woman who is sick of all these men, because she's the only woman in her office, of all these men not knowing how to do certain tasks, like make coffee in the morning, or like clean up the meeting room, or like prepare the meeting room for a meeting. All those stupid little small things she has to do because she's the only woman in office, so the men are kind of just expecting her to do these things. It's natural. It's Japanese culture. It's Japanese office worker culture. It happens in every single office. It's either the woman or it is the last person to join the company. So the youngest, the recruit, the green one. And she's sick of it. She's like, why do I have to do this? This is not fair. I have to do the same job as these men, and above it, pick up all of these small stupid tasks. Like, these men expect me to bring them their coffee at their desk while they're working, while I actually have to do the same job as they're doing. The same amount of work has to be finished in the same amount of time, but I'm also running around doing small stupid things, oh, the printer paper, we don't have printer paper anymore, can you refill the printer paper? Why don't you refill the paper? You're standing at the printer, refill the printer paper. Don't yell at me to do it. They're literally yelling at her. I was angry. I don't know if you can notice, but I was angry. But one day she decides, you know what? I'm gonna act like I'm pregnant. Maybe they respect me. Maybe I don't have to run around the office with heavy boxes anymore because, oh no, you're a pregnant woman, let me do that. And they start doing that, her co-workers. And then at one point, she becomes too big because she's pretending to be pregnant. She becomes too big, and then she can stay home. And then when she's at home, she's wondering, like, how are they gonna make their coffee and stuff like that. And at the end, the office workers, they manage to do their things. They learn how to make the coffee and things like that. But that's not what this was about in the end. It started like that, and you're like, go girl, yeah, show these men some. But then in the end, the plot twist, halfway through the book, like somewhere about here, I was starting to doubt her. She was going to doctor's appointments, she was doing baby yoga, or like pregnant woman yoga, whatever. And I was like, hold on, is she pregnant? I was like, is this woman so delusional? She actually thinks she's pregnant? Because it started as a joke. That's how it started. She was like, you know what? From tomorrow on, I'm gonna act like I'm pregnant. And then within a couple of months, I can go on vacation because, like, that's what pregnant women do. You get vacation, and then I can come back to the office and be like, yeah, that was a good vacation. Did you guys learn anything while I was gone? Did you learn how to make coffee? That's kind of how it started. But then, in the end of the book, she gives birth. And I was like, what? Huh? Crazy story. But the message in the book was really good too. And that's why I think it should be a classic. It's crazy, and it has a good message. That's we don't need more. That's good. Next up, I have a couple of, because I see that I don't have that much time. I need to stop rambling on. But those were the most important ones. I'm gonna talk about 4 all female writers again. Look at that. We had 1 male writer, did we? Yeah, we did. Only 1 male writer. Look at that. Woman for the win. Crazy, right? How in our century, most writers are women. But in the time of Jane Austen, the time of the Bronte sisters and Jane Austen, that wasn't normal. It was men who wrote, and women were not allowed to write. We live in such great times. I love this. I am stoked to see more female writers in literature. I really am. Even though I absolutely adore Tolstoy and Oscar Wilde and all of them, we need more women. Our voices count too. More queer voices too. I want to see more queer voices. I want to read about queerness more often, like actual queerness, not hidden queerness only. But the next couple of books or writers, it's not necessarily the book I'm gonna show you, it's the writer themselves that I think that could be absolute classics in the future. We have Joan Didion. Do I need to explain why Joan Didion is a classic novelist? No, I don't. She just is. A Year of Magical Thinking. Read it, understand it. Easy. Ottessa Moshfegh, is that how you say it? I'm so sorry, girl. Not necessarily this book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Not necessary, but just all of her books are good. But this book would be a classic for me because it is so important to talk about depression in women. Because depression in women is different than depression in men, and technology, science, not technology, not that far. We're not half robots yet, not yet. Maybe that comes one day, but science is only recently, like the last decade, science finally started to look at women's bodies different than from men's bodies, because we have always looked at bodies of men and just applied the medical care from a man's body, tested there, and put it onto a female's body. That is not how it works. Like, even for a long while in medieval times, men thought, scientists, they thought that a woman's vagina, like a woman's reproductive system, was the phallus, so the penis of the man, but like pulled inwards, so it was hollow. Yeah. I don't know if you ever saw that video of it's everywhere on Instagram and TikTok, but it shows like an image of like a woman's reproductive system, and it shows how it's always like a circle and then the tubes and then two little balls here. That is not how it looks like when it's inside your body. It's not how it looks like. It's like all squished in there, and like maybe one tube is more there and the other tube is more over there, and like that's how it is in here. We're not perfectly symmetrical. Also, everything is moving in our body. It might move to another place while we're doing exercises. Like, that's all normal. But like, who's teaching us that? Whoever told you that? Until you until you watched the YouTube, the Instagram reel or the TikTok. Who? Nobody. The TikTok did. Again, TikTok is teaching us more than we've ever thought in school. How bad is that? But the thing is, I think we should talk more about how women's health should be looked at differently. Same with diet culture. We women are given diets that men are doing, but men don't have our hormones. They don't go to a cyclus where our hormones change every week. And it's so important to think about that when you're doing a diet, that you follow your hormones, because your body needs different things in every single phase around your circle. And no, your cycle, not your cycle. And just, nobody tells us women that. We're going on crazy diets for centuries now, and we're feeling bad and we're feeling exhausted. And it all makes sense. Of course, you are feeling exhausted. You're in your follicle stage. You should be eating a fuck ton of fats, of good fats. Eat salmon, eat avocado, eat this, eat that. But when you're in your luteal phase, you should eat different things, enjoy different things. when you're in another phase, like, ooh, watch out with sugars. You better not be eating sugars right now because it's gonna flare up your hormones. You're gonna get acne. You're gonna feel bad. You're gonna feel exhausted. It's all so logical when you look at it, when you know it, but you have to know it. We have to have access to it. And the thing is, we've only been researching this for 20 years. This is 20 years of research. That's nothing compared to hundreds of years for men. And we women, we only have 20 years of research on our bodies and what we actually need. Saddening. But same with depression. It's different. Not that Otessa Moshfegh explains that in our book, but it's a novel about depression in women, and it's interesting to read it about. It's like Yellow Wallpaper. That is an actual classic, The Yellow Wallpaper, and I think we should talk more about that book because that book is crazy too. Next up, I have Ellie Smith. Ellie Smith is a great writer. We should be talking more about this woman. Ellie Smith is so good. Oh my god. When was this published? Also 2014. We need to talk more about Ellie Smith books. We just do. Same goes for Rachel Cusk. Rachel Cusk books, I read 2. Her writing style, so nice. The conversations she writes, I love how she writes conversations. So good. So good again. These female writers, we need to talk about them the next 100 years. We need to. I'm just saying. Get ready to talk about them because I will. Then I have 2 men. And I'm gonna talk about these 2 books real quick because it's getting a long video. I'm sorry, guys. I was in a talking mood, so. Why do I think these next 2 writers are important? Because they really shaped our culture. They also shaped movie culture, Netflix culture. They shaped 2 genres, and the first genre is horror and fantasy, because this is actually a fantasy book by Stephen King. I think it's a fantasy. Yeah, this is the fantasy one, yeah. But Stephen King, famous for horror. Stephen King is such an influence in the book genre. He changed that landscape completely. And he's also changing the landscape of fantasy. And I love that. This man has so much influence. And that is why I think, even if you don't like Stephen King or whatever, even if it's not your genre of books, if you're not a horror fan, if you're not a fantasy fan, that's okay. But he has so much influence on what is happening today in that genre. And that is why he should be in this list. This is why I think Stephen King is gonna be classic literature. It's the same like with June, but June is written in the 70s, I think? 70s, 80s? June too. June is a classic. I already consider June as a classic. I don't know how many years you need to count before a book can be a classic. But June is a classic, and that's why I don't have it in this list, because I already consider it as old and a classic. Oh, Kyle, my darling. Hello. I know, I've been talking for so long. You need attention, I know. Thank you for telling me. Thank you, Kyle. But yeah, Stephen King is absolutely in this list, and you cannot convince me otherwise. And another one, I really don't know how to pronounce his name, but I'm gonna say Cixin Liu. It's probably wrong. It's okay. I got the last one of the trilogy, but this entire trilogy, sci-fi. Wow. I have read sci-fi. Like I said, I've read Dune. I think that's almost all the sci-fi I read. But this writer really got me into sci-fi. And that's because of the way he writes. He explains so much science in his books, but he explains it in a way that I like to read it. I like to read about science. and he uses that science to write his story, and that is amazing. Wow. I hate that the movie and the Netflix series were flops. I don't think it's the fault of the writer. I think the writer did an amazing job. Also, the life story of the writer, if you ever have time to look that up, you should look it up. Then you know why the movies that they made from these books and like the Netflix series are such flops. And I'm calling it a flop because this is Chinese supremacy. We finally have a Chinese writer who broke through with an amazing fucking series with tomes of books. Look at how thick these guys are. All three of them are thick like that. And I am so glad that it's written by a Chinese person. And then I was glad when it said to be a Netflix series. Like, I got the sticker and I'm like, oh my god, it's gonna be a Netflix series. Nice. But I was expecting more of Netflix. I was expecting it to be all Chinese characters, and they made it so much more white. The book barely has white characters in them. Barely. Almost next to none white characters. It's all Chinese characters. And I was so proud. I'm like, yes! All Chinese characters, like, yes, thank you. And then the Netflix series is like, let's make more characters white. Because, I mean, it's a Western audience. They're white. Then they can, relate more. No, Netflix, no. I don't need to relate to this. It's sci-fi. It's about aliens. I don't want to relate. Just keep the characters Chinese, please. It's the same if you would, take Pachinko and let's change some characters to white people. Why? This is a Korean Japanese story. This is a story in China, in Chinese science labs, Chinese talking to terrestrial life. No, Netflix, no, you disappoint me. I was expecting so much from the Netflix. Anyway, this is turning into a rant about the Netflix series, but sci-fi classic, absolutely. This is going to shape new books for us, new narratives, new ways of looking at sci-fi. And there are really good sci-fi books that came out recently where you just see the influence, where they took a different route. It's not that Star Wars or Dune story anymore. It's different. And that I like. That I love. But like I said in the beginning of the movie, it's a movie by now. Yeah, it's almost an hour long. Shall I go on another hour? Then we have a movie. I think that's a good plan. I think that's good. But you can't look at these three books and be like, oh yeah, they're comparable. No, but they're all classics to me. They're all future classics. And that's what I meant in the beginning of my video. Classics are always shelved together, but they don't relate to each other. Classics is just a name we give to things that were important back in the days, to things that had influence on us, things that had influence on literature, that you can tell oh yeah, this writer was inspired by that writer, and that's why we now have this book. And I think that's important, and I think these writers will inspire future writers. And I'm so stoked to read their books and see how these books inspired future books that I'm going to read. Yeah, oh my god, 50 minutes of me talking about books. Wow. Thank you if you got all the way to the end. And oh my god, let me know which books that you read you think should be a classic in the future. I really want to know your lists. And of course, I will have to read them then. I want to know, like, why do you think that those books should be classics? What makes them a classic? What makes a classic a classic? What do you think, Carol? No, 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 no. We're not showing our butthole. That's not nice. Whoops. I nails in this Victorian piece. How dare you? I don't know, is it Victorian? I don't know my time periods. It's giving country. Anyway. Yeah, so let me know and thank you for watching. See you next time.